Get online. Okay. Good morning. I want to welcome you to the meeting of the Higher Ed Committee of the Senate. We have two bills before us today, but before we start, I want to call on Senator Hickman to have our morning invocation. Senator Hickman.
Thank you, sir. Let us pray. Lord God, what a beautiful morning you've given us. Lord, the sun is shining bright, and Lord, we know that this is in your hands. And Father, we ask you to be with us during this meeting today. Lord, just help us to do things that will honor you. In your son's name I pray. Amen.
Do you want to check and see if the sound system's working? Doesn't sound to me like it is.
I can hear your echo in the hall.
Pardon?
I can hear your echo in the hall.
Okay. That's good. Okay. First bill before us this morning, we're going to call Senate Bill 239. We have a revision on Senator Orrick's bill. We're doing just a clarification in there on the governor and his appointment.
Thank you, because it was not quite put it, yes, that's right.
So we have that, we've had that sent to us, but right now we are waiting for printed copies that I can circulate. Senator Harrell, I want to ask you if you would present Senate Bill 239, and I think we're working off of 4904888S. If everyone will get that before you, we'll go through this. If you'd like to present the bill, I think there's been some changes in the bill since it was presented today. Senator Harrell, let me make that mic live. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, the chairman is right. We're on LC 4904888S. I presented this bill on Wednesday. It is a bill about part-time students and how fees and tuition are calculated. It's basically changing how fees are calculated to correspond more with the number of classes that each student is taking. The reason for this is because I realized that part-time students who take 2 classes generally, or sometimes 1, end up paying 100% of the fees. And as fees climb higher and higher, and the students take sometimes 8 years to finish a degree, that means that by the time they finish, these part-time students who often are working their way through school, by the time they finish their degrees, they've paid thousands and thousands of dollars more than students who are able to go more quickly, not having to work as they go to school. So the only change that is made in this substitute is the first bill I presented to you calculated or prorated the fees based on credit hour. So if they took 1 credit hour, they paid that equivalent of fees that would be divided out to equal 1 credit hour, same for 2, same for 3. This groups the credits into ranges, and I shared with you on Monday that I was thinking about changing it this way. So in this bill, if you took from 1 to 4 credit hours, and typically classes on semester schedules are 3 credit hours. The reason I made it 4 is because some classes are 4 hours and labs tend to be 1 hour. So I made it 1 through 4 to accommodate for if somebody was taking a lab or a 4-hour class. So 1 to 4 credit hours would pay 25% of the fees. 5 to 7 credit hours would pay 50% of the fees. 8 to 10 credit hours would pay 75% of the fees, and students taking 11 credits or more would go ahead and pay the full fees. I did take time in the interim to have a phone call with the Board of Regents, which I did find very interesting. I learned a lot about why we have these fees and what they are paying for. However, in the end, it doesn't change that basically we are asking our part-time students who are oftentimes working their way to school, basically through paying 100% of these fees for a long period of time, we're really kind of asking them to subsidize the college experience that the people who get to go full-time are having, while more of the part-time students really don't get to utilize many of the services that they're paying for because they're just simply not on campus as long. And that's a result of how our payment structure, how our payments are structured, is to really advantage the full-time students and put the part-time students at a disadvantage. And this needs to change. However, we probably could have more conversations about other ways to change it. This is one way to change it. But I ask you to move forward on this bill so that we can put some pressure on the system to have these conversations so that we don't just keep doing it the way we've been doing it, because that's the way people are used to it, because it does disadvantage a huge group of people. And if we don't change anything, it's the families and our young people who suffer.
Thank you, Senator. Any comments or questions from the committee? I'm going to call on Senator Hickman first.
Can I stay here? I need to go back.
Yes, no, you just,
Thank you, Senator Harrell. I went back and also did some research on this, and I'd like to share that with y'all at this time, and I appreciate your comments and all. I do know in the bill we were talking about two things. We were talking about tuition and we were talking about fees, and of course tuition is based on credit hours, as we understand.
Well, there is an exception to that, however, and I discussed that when I presented the bill previously. We do have some students at 4 universities that begin to pay full-time tuition if they take 6 hours. So if they take 2 classes, they're paying full-time tuition at 4 universities.
Yeah. So, but the main thing I think we're talking about here is the fees, and as I understand it, these fees are set. They're set by each individual institution, but yet approved by the Board of Regents. So I think the school that you had more questions about was Gwinnett College, I believe it was. And so, as I understand it, each individual school comes up with different committees. Like they would have a technology committee, have some type of activity committees, and those committees decide on what the fees are. And then those committees are also made up of a broad section of the stakeholders, such as, I think somewhere around 50% of the committees are made up of students, and the rest of them made up of people. So it's not just administration going in and mandating these things.
That's true.
So the state of Georgia has given the Board of Regents the right to review and set these fees, and the fees are determined at the individual institution level. So again, Gwinnett College could do one thing, whereas University of Georgia or Albany State or Georgia Tech could do something else based upon these particular fees. If we want to lower the fees, I think we need to discuss that with individual institutions instead of going and doing a mandate for the whole university system. I know when Georgia Southern went from 1AA football, which is championship series, to 1A football, they had to raise money to fund the program, and they actually had a vote among the whole student body to increase student activity fees, and they overwhelmingly supported the football program, and that's why it went into play. And then, of course, the Board of Regents then approved that approval. So the Board of Regents policy is that the committees at the school level reviews all the mandated fees that must have at least 50% more students on these committees. And new fees must have at least 50% of the student body to pass those fees in order for them to come into play. Has anybody gone in, and I know you sound like you've done a lot of work, and I appreciate it, has anybody gone in and really looked at the fiscal impact of these things? Because I think you've got so many of these fees that are used to fund the debt service on a lot of these buildings and all that are on campus, like student union buildings and that type of thing. So if we went in and cut those things out, it would be a tremendous impact on the individual schools. I think we've got to know two things. We've got to know that it's on an individual school basis, and we got to know the impact of that on the individual schools, the debt service type deal. And we also need to remember that because of the way the fees are set up now in the state of Georgia, that we do have 2 of the flagship institutions in the whole United States in Georgia. That means Georgia and Georgia Tech. So some of what we're doing with these fees and tuition is correct, and it's attracting the biggest and brightest students, and a lot of those students are staying here. We have a great university system that students want to attend and stay in Georgia. We all want, I see this in this situation, you know, we all want small government until it comes to something like this, and then we want big government to take it over and mandate what happens. And I think we need to go back and look at the institution level and let the institution decide. What if I said that I did not want to support the Jack Hill State Park down in Reedsville, Georgia, because I don't go camping, and I don't want my tax dollars to go for that? I can't do that type of thing. What if I said that now that I go home to Statesboro, Georgia, I use I-20, and I don't want to pay any maintenance fees for going down I-75? I can't do that. So I think it's very important for us to look at the individual. When we look at this situation, we look at the individual institutions and go back and talk to them about these fees instead of big things. Personally, as this bill is drafted, I cannot support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say that I wouldn't compare this to not wanting to pay for a park if I didn't want to use the park, because our schools are you know, that's our workforce training, and we need to educate. There's an interest of the state to educate these kids, and with this fee schedule the way it is, a good number of our families and young people are unable to access education, higher education in Georgia. So there's a vested interest in the state to look at how these services are funded and how they're paid for, so they don't disadvantage one group to advantage another group.
Thank you.
It is true that these fees are, the fee schedule is determined at each school, and they do have committees of input. I would question whether any of the part-time students are able to participate in these discussions, in these committees that make these decisions. My guess would be that it would be full-time students that are going to look out for the interests of full-time students. So I don't put a whole lot of credibility in the fact that they have student input into these fee schedules. The fee schedules do vary from school to school, but there's a consistency in the increase of fees across the board at every institution, and the percentage of the student's bill is higher and higher loaded with fees. And these fees are not covered by the Hope Scholarship. There's one fee, and by the way, the fees that are most expensive are athletic fees and institutional fees. And the institutional fee is really expensive. And that was a fee that was put in place during the Great Recession to help plug the hole of the $1 billion that was cut from the higher education funding formula. Those fees are still there and are still very high. That is, in essence, tuition. Okay, that's not paying for a building. That's not paying for a sports program. That's paying the general costs of the school, but yet it's not covered by the Hope Scholarship. That in itself is a huge problem and increases the cost to students across the board. So the fee schedule does need to be looked at.
Any other questions, Senator? Senator Payne?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I were reading through this and looking at this last night too, and I had some of the same concerns that Senator Hickman shared, because what I've learned since our last meeting is a lot of these are, especially the smaller institutions, are the ones that impacts the hardest, because they have capital outlay projects, a parking deck, for instance, that they have parking fees to pay off that parking deck that they've built. And if you cut into those fees, you know, they still have to pay the bill every month. And so, I mean, that means they're going to have to find somewhere else to raise fees somewhere else to pay for the fees that they've reduced for everybody else. But, and plus that, and the fact that even though they might be a part-time student, they still have full access to the campus and to the student center, to the, you know, that those fees help pay for. So, I mean, I don't know, have you considered getting a fiscal note on this, or to find out what the fiscal impact would be to the, because I think that's the concern, is it varies from institution to institution to institution, and what the true fiscal impact would be.
Right. It would be a complicated question.
Right. And
Right.
So I just, you know, that's where my hesitation is too, because I just feel like, you know, these institutions, where the rubber hits the road, I'd like to know the impact that it's going to bring to the smaller institutions that are, you know, really, because a lot of those smaller institutions are blue-collar towns like I have in Dalton, where, you know, they have, you know, only 60% of the kids are full-time. So, I mean, the majority are part-time, and but they also have jobs to go to work. It's not your typical system where it's just kids coming out of high school and going to college. A lot of this is people in their 20s and 30s going back to college, and they can only take one class at a time, and then they're also having to, you're talking about the years that you're raising your families, you got children, you got child care to pay for, and all this, and then so I understand the need to kind of give them assistance, but at the same time, if it's taking money away from a project that they've outlaid to pay for,
Sure.
What's the burden of?
Yeah.
That's gonna bring
So you're talking about the facilities fees that are paying off bond debt for buildings. That's not all the fees that there are. In fact, those aren't the fees that are driving the high cost. The fees that are driving the high cost is the institutional fee and the athletic fee. And you can make the case that any part-time student does have access to those on-campus services. You're always going to find exceptions. You're going to have some part-time students that do take advantage of them, but my guess is that the vast majority are not able to. I think we have to recognize that our universities are workforce development. And people need these degrees to be able to function in society and earn enough money to raise a family and live in a safe neighborhood. And they're paying for a degree. They're not paying for an experience so much as they were in the past. They're serious about getting that degree so that they can go forward in their lives and increase their wealth and not be poor. And I think that's the priority right now of our university system over, you know, having a fancy student center and you know, that college experience. Many, many, many of our students cannot partake of that experience because of the cost.
All right, thank you.
Senator Jordan?
Yeah, thank you. So with respect to your bill, it's my understanding that it's not that the students wouldn't pay fees. It's just that it's basically going to be concomitant with the number of hours that they're taking at a particular school, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then with respect to basically just truing it up, making it fair in terms of how many hours they're taking at a college or university.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of, we're talking about buildings and the like, and, you know, what if they want to build a parking deck? And so, you know, that makes sense. It's my understanding that a lot of those larger projects kind of are funded by capital accounts. At least I know at the University of Georgia, I get a lot of calls for those. Is that your understanding?
Meaning like private fundraising?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that a lot of them are,
Capital
but they did
campaigns,
do bond spending quite a bit in the 1990s, that they're paying off that debt. So there's both.
And so, and then one last question, something you said that I wanted to follow up on. You indicated that there are institution fees, and that those institution fees are really basically just to fill the hole where the state, where we as the state have really failed to appropriately fund the university system.
That's what I was told, and I did ask the Board of Regents to provide to me some some graphs, because I've seen those graphs of K-12 education funding, and it's it's alarming how long it took. So when the K-12 schools were cut in 2008, it's alarming how long it took for that funding to climb back up. It lagged the recovery in the state budget. And so what the Board of Regents told me is that they have not, their funding has not been restored. They're still under austerity cuts from the Great Recession. So I asked them to get me some more information about how much they've been budgeted through their funding formula since 2008. Because they're claiming that the institutional fees, and those are the largest fees. Really, the most money in terms of fees is not funding facilities, it's funding, it's institutional fees and athletic fees. So that's really, it's tuition. And, you know, maybe what we need to look at is moving that to tuition instead of institutional fees. But it's easier for the Board of Regents to increase fees than tuition. You know, they've been telling us over and over again that they haven't raised tuition for X number of years, but they have raised fees, which is basically, it doesn't matter to families whether it's tuition or fees. It's cost and it's debt.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Strickland next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support your bill. I said a couple questions. Sorry, I was still in ethics, so I'm a lot of breath still. I may have missed you saying some of this earlier. I apologize if so. First question, in dealing with the fact that I think Senator Payne was mentioning that you have things that are available to part-time students and full-time students equally. Is it possible for a school to limit some access to certain things on campus to part-time students in lieu of not paying the fees?
Sure.
And so I didn't know if that was something that's currently happening, or if your bill keeps them from doing that, keeps the school from still using their discretion about who can use certain things on campus.
Well, they would still be paying partial fees, so I would think it would be hard to make the case that they can't use a recreation center that they're paying some for.
Yeah, and I guess so the follow-up on that would be then, are you concerned that could be something that a school does in response to your bill, is they will limit the ability of part-time students to use certain things such as a gym or something like that?
I don't think they could,
Okay.
because we're not saying they're paying zero fees.
Right.
We're saying they're paying the fees to be more congruent with how much time they are spending on campus.
So they shouldn't be doing that based on your bill then.
Right.
The other questions follow-up, are you concerned that, as you mentioned, that what Board of Regents could do is just raise tuition to offset this? Is there any concern with that?
I think they should. If schools cost more, they should raise tuition. And then the students would qualify under the Hope Scholarship.
Right, okay, thank you.
I think Senator Hickman was next.
I'll defer to later. I think some of the other guys just came in.
Okay, Senator Redd.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm running a little late and trying to I was at 3 meetings at one time. But I just wanted to say I agree with this bill because I completed my doctorate degree at Georgia, and I would take maybe 1 or 2 classes a semester. The tuition was one thing, but when I looked at the fees, you know, that created a dilemma for me. So
If you would pull the mic closer, please.
I just said that I support the bill, basically. I went a roundabout way of saying it. But from personal experience at Georgia, as a doctoral student, the tuition was one thing, but when I looked at all the fees I had to pay, it just, that really caught my attention. So that's why I support the bill.
Any other comments?
If you're concerned about the fiscal impact, then what could happen if they're not collecting enough money in fees to meet their costs, they do have the option to raise tuition. And the advantage to that for students and families is that then those costs fall under the Hope Scholarship. And we do have room to put more money into the Hope Scholarship because our Constitution allows us to put 35% of Hope Scholarship proceeds into education, but right now we're only putting 25% in.
Senator Burns, Chairman Burns.
I thank the senator for her bill, and as we look at it, I just would like to ask a couple of questions and a perspective. With my experience in the USG, fees are tightly controlled by the region. So as we requested an increase in fees, there were many years that there were moratoriums on fees. And I want to point out that there's a difference between an institutional fee and an athletic fee or a parking fee or a recreational fee or a technology fee. There's quite a difference. Not all institutions utilize an institutional fee. Generally speaking, those institutional fees are there when a university has a special mission. They have a special requirement to deliver a certain type of services, and that may force that fee up. Now, my concern is this mandates to the system a very specific percentage of fees. And I do note that you point out that it could be up to 25%. Is that correct? So if I take less than 4 credit hours, I must be charged no more than 25%. Is that correct?
My legislative intent is that you would pay 25%.
Well, I would suggest to you there's some university system schools that charge no fees if you're under 4 credit hours. And I would also suggest to you that there are some university system schools who have both presence-based and online classes, and if you're not taking the presence-based mode, then certain fees do not apply. That creates some problems, to your point. At one institution where a student may take one course in a presence mode, 3 credit hours, and 4 courses or 3 courses in an online mode, an additional 9 to 12 hours, they would not pay certain fees, but they would not be eligible, as Senator Strickland pointed out, to utilize certain amenities. The most obvious there, for the student at least, is their recreational options. Most students participate in the recreational option. They participate certainly in the parking option. They all participate in the technology option. So the cost of technology support for a 3-hour course is very little difference between a student that takes multiple 3-hour courses. So I have real concerns about the mandating process. I appreciate your intent, and I support the reality that says we have to find a way to effectively reduce educational costs. I would also say that I'm not sure that tuition increase is the solution. It creates a lot of angst in the parent's perspective, and if you suggest that Hope would support that, you are correct. But at the end of the day, less than 25% of students in the university system of Georgia receive Hope. We get a large percentage in the first year, we lose about half of those in the second year, and we lose about half of those again by the time they're juniors. So Hope does not solve this problem. And I just ask that the senator reconsider the mandates of specific percentages.
So you're saying that in some institutions, if students enroll in online classes, they are not charged fees?
That is correct.
That seems to, that kind of thinking is the kind of thinking behind this bill, that you pay more for what you use.
What you consume.
Yes.
What the service is provided. But I would suggest to you that to take 25% of the technology fee for an online class doesn't make sense, because that technology cost actually increases in an online class. So if I take 1 online class or I take 3 online classes, my technology costs are pretty consistent.
But yet they're not paying for technology fees.
If they are not taking a presence, I need to look. We need to ask that question. That's a very good question. I would hope they would pay a technology fee. Similarly, in a parking situation, if I drive to campus for 1 course, I have to have somewhere to park. The fact that I'm only there for, let's say, 2 hours or 3 hours, it's almost always at a peak time frame where you have to accommodate parking. I want you to know that students choose to select convenience courses. They select hours of convenience. So even though you may have a 10-hour or a 12-hour academic day from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, there are between 10 and 1 is that prime undergraduate time. And between 1 and 3 or 4 is prime master's degree time. And then in the evenings, as Dr. Rhett pointed out, it's graduate, generally PhD and master's work. So you have to try to balance those things. But parking is not easily divisible by credit hours. Technology is not easily divisible by credit hours. Recreation is not easily divisible by credit hours. So I'm not sure that credit hour is the right measure to say appropriate fee. I think it should be consumer-based. I think it should be based upon consumption. So I choose to participate in this option. And certain universities may be able to provide that in some form of a menu option. Where you need this service, you provide this service, you're assessed a fee. Now, institutional fees, I agree with you, they tend to be a surrogate for tuition. And I'll say those tend to be environments where they have special missions. There's special types of programs that are being offered that the student feels the market determines the cost of it and they're willing to pay that additional fee. For example, executive MBA programs. The executive MBA program is not based on tuition. It's based upon the value of that program to the recipient. And it's market-based, so I can go to University of Phoenix, or I can go to Case Western, or I can go to any number of institutions, but I choose to go to the University of Georgia's Terry College of Business Executive MBA program because of its recognition and status.
Thank you. I mean, so these are the discussions we need to have. Mr. Chairman?
I just want to make the committee aware of the time. We have another resolution we need to talk about, and also I want to have Ms. Tracy Cook from USG join us via Zoom. I will say this while we're getting Zoom hooked up. I applaud the senator for bringing this bill. I'm not sure the bill's perfect. I'm not sure at this stage of the game it has to be perfect, but I do think that it's a worthy discussion. We have probably talked more about the issues associated with fees this morning than I've heard in the last 10 years, and for that reason I applaud the bill coming. I think we need to realize, I think fees have been out of control in the past, and it's an issue we need to look at. I know at certain universities they're charging meal plan fees across the board for students that never ate a meal on campus. I understand what the point Senator Burns is making. It needs to be on a consumption basis, but I think we also need to be able to figure out I think we need to be able to figure out how to allocate those costs. But in the meantime, I think the discussion needs to continue, and I think if we don't have a bill on the floor, this discussion's probably not going to continue. So I think this is a great time to have this discussion. I think that the issue needs to move forward, and I think we need to start asking questions that we need to and try to be able to develop policy that meets the needs of students throughout Georgia. I was a working student going to college. I know exactly what you're talking about. But I'll say this, at that time, fees were not an issue. Of course, there was a lot of things that were not as they are now 50-something years ago. But anyway, I want to call on Tracy Cook with USG to join us at this time. Any comments on this bill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding this bill. I would like, and it's been a really robust discussion, I would like to talk about purpose, process, and some of the concerns that we have with the bill as written. If I might start out there, I know there was some questions being asked with respect to the fiscal impact. We did a high-level calculation, and we think that the impact across all of our institutions is somewhere in the neighborhood of over $100 million. So if I can talk about purpose of student fees, process, and then the concerns. The purpose of these fees obviously are to provide to round out the student experience. Academics is clearly the primary purpose of why we're in business, but there are lots of services that our students utilize and expect to have across our campuses. There are facility needs that we have and that are supported by these fees. Some were mentioned today. This parking, we have student centers, we have health centers, to name a few, and these are all supported by mandatory fees at our institutions. If I can just go back a little bit to talk about how we got there, and Senator Harrell talked about it a little bit. Back prior to the 90s, we used to receive bond funding through the state to support a lot of these facilities. Sometime in the 90s, there was a shift at the state level and really a focus on funding projects that were in the academic space. So more academic facilities, and that has continued. During that time, then we began to look at ways, because we did have growing enrollment, but look at ways to provide those facilities that were needed for our students, to include parking, et cetera. And we started having these fee-funded projects. So many estimates we looked at, what is the student population, number of fee payers, all of that matters in indicating and setting the price for what is the level of fee needed to support those activities. And so part of the challenge is we've made assumptions about the number of fee payers, who pays. That is done at a campus level. Each institution made those decisions. Different assumptions, some were written where every student would pay the fee. Some were written where different populations would pay different amounts. But again, that is project specific. That is at the institution level. And so what really becomes very disruptive is to now come in and change that revenue stream that in many cases is utilized to support those facilities that have fixed costs. So that is one of our concerns with the legislation as written. I think others talked about utilization. We do know that our part-time students many do take advantage of the facilities on our campuses. And again, they're all available for all students. And they take advantage, full-time and part-time, take advantage of these facilities and amenities in different ways. Process, if I could talk about process a little bit, the process is we do have student fee committees across all of our institutions. They are, we mandate that minimally 50% of the committee is our students. Representation from students, part-time students can participate. Usually SGA representatives are participants on these committees, and they do speak for the student body at large. So they speak for the full-time student as well as the part-time student. And we have made a concerted effort really to look at fees going forward. And so someone talked about a moratorium. We did have a few years where we really, we kind of stopped and looked at fees to say, how do we be more efficient? How do we kind of right size our activities in lieu of in fee increases? And as you know, as costs increase, the revenue associated with those costs have to increase. But to the extent that we can absolutely be more efficient and look at other ways to curtail necessary fee increases, we absolutely do that. One of the things I shared with the senator yesterday, our number of new fees and fee increases have decreased significantly over the last 10 years. So this has been a significant push and of great importance to the leadership at the USG as well as our board with respect to affordability. So yes, we talk about tuition. We talk about, for the last 5 years, we have not increased tuition 3 of those 5 years, but by the same token, we have really tightened up on fee increases and new fees as well. So now the fees that exist, but again, fee increases and new fees are not growing. And like I said, our institutions are looking at ways to be more efficient. One other thing I did want to mention, there was some discussion on the special institutional fee. That is one of the fees that spans across all campuses. We talked about during the Great Recession, starting in the 2009, it was about a 4-year period where I think all of us remember the state's economy really suffered. State revenues were down. State agencies had to take significant cuts in budgets for the university system. That equated to about $1 billion over a 4-year period. And during that time, during recessions, and we saw it play out during that time, we had a tremendous growth in our enrollment. So while we were experiencing mid-year cuts, permanent cuts to our budget base, our enrollment was simultaneously growing. And so one of the strategies that we put in place during that time was to institute a special institutional fee that is used very much in the same manner that tuition is used. So most of our other mandatory fees are very specific. Like I said, they support parking decks, they support health centers, they support student recreation, where the special institutional fee is very similar in that it supports the same activities that are supported by tuition, which is our instruction mission. That fee today generates about $200+ million across all of our institutions. Again, it was created very specifically to address what was happening during the recession. Part of the challenge is our funding that was lost, that $1 billion that was lost during that period of time, has never been restored. So I do believe in the K-12 system that some of those funds, if not all, I'm not sure, I don't want to speak to that, but that has been restored over time for the university system. Once the economy turned around, incremental growth, the state has been very supportive of funding incremental growth for new years moving forward and for increases in our enrollment. But that $1 billion that was lost during that 2009 through 2013 timeframe was never restored. And so again, one of the measures that we used was the creation of that special institutional fee. It does support about $200 million in our budget. And to eliminate that fee would, in essence, be another budget cut of $200 million across our institutions. So that was a very specific fee that was put in place during the recession, and it is a little different than the other fees that support very specific activities across our campuses. So again, and I heard this in the discussion too. I do think it's important, and we do this. We do look at our fees across all of our institutions. Institutions have created them. Some of them have different assumptions and different mechanisms for how these fees are assessed to students. And I think, again, our concern with the legislation is the fiscal implication, that $100 million that we believe will be lost during the shift. And then because so much of those fees and there are quite a few facility supported fees across our campuses, and they are pretty significant as well. The loss of that revenue, we still have to pay those fixed costs. So I'll stop there and just see if and I just appreciate the time to be able to respond to the legislation. And I do want to mention, I have not seen the substitute bill, so I am speaking from the original bill that was submitted.
Do we have any questions from the committee for Ms. Cook? Senator Hickman?
I'd just like to make one more statement. This really is a more institution by institution situation. And I think, again, when you brought it up at our first meeting, you were more or less singling out Gwinnett College. And I think
I was using them as an example.
Yeah, thank you. But I don't think that we should mandate, as I understand in talking to the people in our area, this is based upon what happens at the college level, and then the Board of Regents approves it. And for us to mandate certain percentages in this bill is totally wrong, in my opinion.
Thank you. I ask that the committee move this bill forward simply because it's generating the kind of discussion that needs to happen so that we don't keep our fee structure the same just because that's always how we've done it, and that we acknowledge that our fee structure is putting a certain group of people, our hardest working people who need these degrees to increase their wealth in their future to support their families, that it's putting those people at a disadvantage, and that we need a solution. The solution might not be exactly this. I am not wedded to this. But if we move this bill forward, then this discussion will continue, and this discussion needs to continue. We all know about the governance of the Georgia General Assembly versus the Board of Regents and who governs what. If we move this forward, it's not necessarily binding in the end anyway, but we will have moved a discussion forward and put pressure on the Board of Regents to not do things the way they've always been done.
Any further questions? Senator Burns?
A quick
If you would pull the mic closer, please.
I'm sorry. A quick comment. This committee is looking at a piece of legislation that can dramatically impact funding of the university system. If Ms. Cook is correct, and I'm sure she is because I worked with her for a long time, it's a significant impact. Most of us experienced a college education over a 4 or 6 year period as a student. I had the opportunity to experience it as a student at both undergraduate and graduate levels, but also in the university system for 30 years as an academic administrator and then as an institutional administrator. I really am not comfortable with the current language and can't support it in its current form. I do support the intent of the author and the intent of the legislation. And I'd like to ask if there's my concern is if we move it forward, there's a possibility we'll have to vote it on the floor, and if it were to pass, I believe it's bad legislation. So I cannot support it in its current form. But I thank the author for her focus, and I look forward to working with her. Thank you.
If we don't move it forward in this meeting, we will not move it forward this session because it won't make crossover. That's the long and short of it.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
I've got a question for Ms. Cook, if we can bring her back up on Zoom. Ms. Cook, I have a question about the austerity cuts that you referred to. Now, are you talking specifically about the cuts, the austerity cuts from 08 through 10, 11, or 12, whenever austerity cuts to higher ed were restored in the current funding in those years? Are you talking about those cuts specifically that were applied to funding during the recession?
So I'm looking at a chart here, between 2009 and 2014, there were cuts in our state. So we're funded through the formula. There were cuts to the formula funding that equated to about approximately $1 billion. And those cuts have never been restored.
Are you talking about those cuts being made up in funding in future years to backfill the loss during those years?
I'm sorry, Chairman, I don't quite understand.
You said until 2014. Was the formula fully funded in 2015?
Okay, so in 2015, the incremental growth for that year, so that change, the incremental growth was funded. But the $1 billion that was taken from our budget was never restored. So yes, post the Great Recession, incremental growth that the USG experienced has been funded by the state. We did have I'll leave 2001 out because that we had the 10% reduction, and we also had the funding formula that wasn't funded, but it was put back in the amended, and so that has been taken care of. But for those specific years between 09 and 14, those funds have never been restored.
Okay. Do we have any current debt that's still reflected on our book that was incurred during those operating years from the austerity cuts that were generated by the austerity cut?
So debt, no, we did not borrow to address any academic and instructional needs. What we did do is we had, and there was a litany of things that we did. We had we did RIFs, we froze positions, we instituted the special institutional fee. There were several changes that we made to address the challenges or the revenue shortages that we experience in the instructional mission. But that's separate and distinct from the borrowing that we did to accommodate or to address other needs such as parking and things of that nature.
Well, it looks to me like the records on FY15 have been closed for 5 years. The financial records and all that's in the history book. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but I mean, public education experienced an $8 billion austerity cut during that same time frame, if I'm not mistaken, going from memory. I mean, those losses, we're never going to recover those losses, but obviously if we're being funded at a level today that's sufficient for the operation to expect for that $1 billion to be restored that we lost in those years, it's probably not going to be a reality. So I think we need to evaluate our operating costs today on what our operating costs today are. If we don't have any existing debt, to use the imposition of a current fee to offset against debts that were incurred from 2008 to 2014, I'm not sure that will meet muster, to be honest with you. I mean, I think we need to look at our current operating situation, and I think the budget ought to reflect the situation we're in currently. That's my opinion only, but that's the way I see it. Is there any other questions on the committee? Senator Payne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cook, I just wanted to ask, is there a mechanism in place that requires ongoing reassessments of the fees that have been added?
So on an annual basis, institutions, they look at all of their mandatory fees. We've actually had, and I wish I had some examples, we've had a couple of institutions that actually have eliminated fees in recent years. And so there's an annual process. These fees have to, and as well as the budgets, have to go to the student fee committees each and every year. They come to the Board of Regents or the University System Office if they are seeking an increase and or a decrease or no change. So we have visibility in all the fees. This is something that the institutions are looking at. We have, again, over the last couple of years, and I'm saying that because I've been instrumentally involved in it, but we have really challenged our institutions to think about affordability and think about ways to either eliminate, decrease, or not increase fees. And we have had great success in that we've had significantly reduced number of new fees or fee increases for many years. So it is an annual process. We have visibility into it. Our institutions are looking for ways to decrease, eliminate, or at least maintain the fee at its existing level.
Senator Jordan.
At the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion do pass.
That time has arrived.
I make a motion do pass.
That would be due pass on LC 490488S.
Yes, sir.
Has passed, and that motion is due pass by substitute. Do I have a second? I have a second by Senator Rett. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 in favor. All opposed? 2, 3. We have 3 opposed. Motion passes. 5-3. All right. Next item on our agenda, Senate Resolution 154. Senator Orrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I bring to you the substitute on Senate Resolution 154. It's LC 490495 S. The changes that we made are very simple, and of course the overall impact of this bill would be to create the Joint Study Committee for Strengthening Georgia's Future Workforce, and that's to direct our attention as the General Assembly to the question of studying the data and coming up with an approach to get a broader needs-based scholarship aid set up in our state. What we did is on line 60, we included the governor as a member of this joint study committee, as well as an appointment for the governor, a member of the business community with a Georgia business or a business association. That brings us to and we had a suggestion from Senator Beach. The Georgia Department of Economic Development on line 67 has been added, and we included the Georgia Independent Colleges Association on line 69. So it's a total of 17 members on the committee as it's designed, and that is I was very heartened to learn a lot in this process, that the REACH program, which Governor Deal launched, and it's not large. It's a very discrete number of students that have been impacted thus far over the 9 years that it's been in, but there is a big effort there to do REACH 2, as they're calling it, and they're very invigorated, and that's a very positive development that will be in this mix, as the commissioner is of the Student Finance Commission is on our committee as it's designed. Also, have had great interest expressed from the governor's office that this is timely, and they welcome our taking it up and want to be very involved. Mr. Chairman, if I have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Does the committee have any questions? I think the appropriate time has arisen. Doc Brett? All right. Pass. This is a due pass of LC 490495S.
Yes.
By substitute, Senate Resolution 154. Do we have a second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the input and help that I've gotten along the way on this to get
Thank
to
you,
this
Senator
point. Thank you,
Orr.
Mr.
We look
Chair.
forward to seeing the work of this committee. This concludes our business, and in way of information, we had Senate Bill 109 that we had discussed previously. We also have House Bill 67 that has been passed in the House that's an identical bill of 109. We'll be taking that bill up. This affords us a little bit more time to do some investigation and exploration into the dynamics of the issues that was in Senate Bill 109 and House Bill 67. So we will, I believe it's 60, is it 67 or 69? Pardon? It's House Bill 67. So anyway, that being said, this concludes the bills that the Senate will be taking up that are Senate bills this year. And we may take some up, but obviously this is the last time for them to make crossover. Thank you so much for your participation, and I appreciate each of you being here and making the effort to be here. When I set the meeting at 9 o'clock, at 8 o'clock, I thought we were going to be gaveling in at 10, so that's the reason for the early meeting. Thank you all for your participation. Meeting's closed.